Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hey everybody, so welcome to a very special episode of Popcorn Psychology. This is a Patreon patron-picked episode. So right off the bat, we want to thank Kayla M. from Delaware, one of our Patreon patrons. She was one of our $50 patrons who got to pick an episode with her generous donation. So today we are finally talking about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a movie that we have been, I think, asked to do time and time again. Not for any particular reason why we haven't. We put it on some Valentine's Day polls and it never won. So now here we're finally doing it. It feels like an appropriate movie to do as well, given the time of year, as it's a very cold movie and it is really cold right now in Chicago. As of right now, it's like -8 degrees outside. So
it's cold.
Yeah. So the aesthetic of the movie very much fits the aesthetic of our lives right now. So with Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, specifically today, we're going to be briefly touching upon Clementine and Joel as individuals. And we're going to be spending most of the episode talking about the quote unquote treatment in the movie. I'm just calling it the lacuna procedure, but basically a procedure in which you can just pick and choose what memories you can remember and what memories you forget, and the implications of that. And it seems to be done by people who are doing it out of, I don't know, like the dive bar version of a medical clinic, if you will.
That seems about accurate. That seems
I
right
think,
to me.
I would call it the strip mall medical clinic.
Yeah, like a pain clinic.
Yeah,
for sure.
Like the same kind of place that Paul Rudd went in whatever show that was where he had to clone himself. Like that, it's like the same kind of vibe of like there's probably a massage parlor nearby.
Yeah.
And like a dodgy nail salon.
Oh, very much for sure. So I just give a brief plot summary. We're introduced to Joel in the movie, a guy who seems very sad and listless, and he figures out that he was actually dating a woman named Clementine, but she had him erased from her memory. And out of retaliation, very grown up, he then has her erased from his memory. And then the movie becomes the process of that and how he finally realizes he doesn't want to forget Clementine. And she actually doesn't want to forget him either. And so it's also kind of their journey back to each other. I guess you can call this movie a romance. I will have opinions about that later, but I will hold that for last thoughts or final thoughts. So, because this is a requested movie, we wanted to make sure to hit upon all parts of it. So right off the bat, we just wanted to talk briefly about each character. So Clementine, to me, when we're introduced to her, she's a pretty, I guess I would call her an audacious person. I don't know. What did you guys think of Clementine from a therapeutic perspective?
I think Clementine came on very quick. I think her personal recognizance of boundaries was quite low, to put it mildly. Yeah, she had none. She was inappropriately attaching very quickly and then was quite quick to discard. At least the movie made us think so. She was quite quick to discard him. She attached firmly and inappropriately and was pushing right past any norms of like normal dating of let's get coffee again, maybe a third coffee, maybe lunch, a movie, just straight to like, I'm gonna get my toothbrush and like move into your house.
Yes.
It was so she did a very, very quick idolization of him and who he can be in her life. And then once he could no longer sustain that, she started to resent him quite quickly.
She seems pretty chaotic in terms of her behavior, in terms of how she just kind of how she presents in general. She just kind of seems a little bit, she seems, I don't know, almost like just pretty stressed out. Like I feel like she seems pretty stressed out, which I think is pretty common when we work with people who have a lot of internal experiences happening at once. It seems like she really has a hard time regulating her emotions.
Yes. That was a very therapeutically euphemistic way to put that. She seems, what'd you say, like internally, like chaotic or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, I think like we do a lot on this show. We have to make our caveats for the cinema of it all. So to be fair, before I say what I'm about to say, we only see snippets of these two people. We also see them, at least at the very beginning of the movie, we realize later that they're two people that have had a significant portion of their memory taken from them. And so
Hmm.
part of her presentation in the beginning, I think you could put under the umbrella of, is she remembering Joel? And part of her being very like all over him and then wanting to be with him and wanting to get her toothbrush and stay with him. I think like a romantic viewing of it could be that she's like remembering him and feeling pulled to him and wanting to be with him. So I do want to put all that out there. And I will say the way she's presenting, I agree with you both in that in all of the through line of all the ways we see Clementine is she does feel to me like people that I've worked with who are more on like the borderline personality disorder diagnoses, in that she attaches very quickly. She can get very, what we sometimes call like angel and demon, where it's like either you are someone that she views as an angel or she or someone that she views as a total antagonist. And there's not a lot of in between. Yeah, like you were saying, like not a lot of personal space, very unaware of how uncomfortable she's making Joel. Like I think a good indicator of that is one of the first scenes when they're on the train together. I think it's a train, right? And
Hmm.
Yeah.
she is like on him, like she sits next to him, and his body could not be more physically like not showing interest. Like even though he likes her, he's like fully into the window of the train. Like he is pulling from her,
Yeah.
and she doesn't seem to be understanding how she's making him feel in that moment. Like just total from like a social skills perspective, totally not tuned in to how her behavior might be off-putting.
No, she is no concern for all of those signals that he's throwing up. He's throwing up every single possible signal of, I want this conversation to end.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yesterday.
Mhm.
Why are you talking to me still?
Yeah.
He's not reinforcing what she says. He's kind of politely smiling and nodding and looking
Mhm.
away quickly. He's showing just anybody could have seen that Jim Carrey was crawling out of his skin,
Yeah. Hmm.
which I think is kind of how Jim Carrey is when he's not bananas, when he's acting.
Hmm.
That he is very much like, please leave me alone.
That's actually, yeah, that's pretty true. I think what clues me into it being more of, I don't know, she still shows a lot of through line criteria of, even though we see her in these very unique situations in the movie, like she still displays a lot of characteristics that to me feel someone who is struggling with borderline, in that she makes a lot of self-destructive decisions as well, like and risky stuff too, like the drunk driving that they get in a fight about at one point. He makes an inference that she sleeps around, though I don't know how real that is, versus him being really crude to her. So we don't know if that's a true thing or not, in terms of something that's said a few times is the way that Clementine makes people like her is by like being overtly sexual with them, which could be a very unfair thing he's saying about her. And if
Yeah.
she is someone that struggles borderline, that could be somewhat true in terms of being like overly flirtatious, a little more like less boundaried with sexuality, that kind of thing. And also when you are someone with borderline, you can have more of a tendency to engage in what we call like I said, like maladaptive or self-destructive coping behaviors, which can be taking risks, like overspending, driving drunk, having sex with people that you didn't really want to have sex with, or in risky scenarios, right? And and I think what you were saying too, Hannah, is she's someone that really seems like she doesn't quite know how to regulate herself
Yeah.
in the scenes where it's really her. Because I know we also see a version of her that's like Joel's version of her in his memories, which is a more regulated version of her. I mean, we could trip out getting in, that could be a black hole we fall into. Talking about that.
It could be. It could be. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it could be, and you look at the behavior we see on screen, like whether it's memories or not. I think it's fair to say that we have unreliable narrator for this film,
for sure.
And I
Absolutely.
think another caveat I want to throw out is that when you see people only in snippets, it's an unfair way to provide a diagnosis, because people in their worst moments don't often represent who they are over a stretch of time.
Oh, that's for sure too.
And in a relationship can bring out both the best and the worst parts of us in alternating quantities. I think people can be at their most vulnerable with people who we are feeling emotionally close to, and that can sometimes trigger some part activity that can be resentful. The downside of if somebody is going through that and they also have borderline personality disorder, what tends to happen is that their attached parts of themselves really want to be held and loved, and they want it so bad because they've been hurt so bad, and they so badly need and want to believe that there is something in the world that will protect them and someone. And if someone feels that way, their attached part will get let out of its box, and it springs forth, attaching onto anything that can take it away from the pain. And when that person ultimately fails to be that protector, because the expectations of what being that protector, that perfect protector would be, are unrealistic and unattainable, unachievable, then the fight part turns on both the self and the other person. It turns on the self for releasing the attached part from its point where it was protected and couldn't get hurt anymore. And now it punishes the person who failed and the self of so in this case, Clem would be punishing herself and what's Jim Carrey's name?
Joel.
Who hurt her. And then where the self-injury can happen is that fight part gets so overactivated that can kind of demand a person punish themselves, or the person can be so overactivated that they want something to ground them to seek relief. And then suicidal behavior can happen when it feels like there is no escape from that. Now, we didn't see any of that in this movie, but we do see the turning on someone from at least what appears quickly. It could be just editing and storytelling, but it appears she quickly gets disillusioned with him, and he fails to be this knight in shining armor and safe landing spot she imagined him to be. And then she starts getting more unstable and aggressive with him. Although just verbally mostly, other than punching him on the train.
Yeah, and I think that we then see that when she is no longer with Joel, she's kind of seeking that through Patrick, right? Even though Patrick is a disgusting person who is fully taking advantage of someone. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the treatment in the movie. But like her calling him in crisis, needing him to calm her down, needing him right away, those like kind of what you're talking about, Ben, like those demonstrations of like, I am in crisis repeatedly, and I need someone outside of me to be the one that regulates me.
And quickly attaching on to someone else that fast.
Yeah.
At least what appears fast. I have no idea I know that their relationship took place.
It's been a week. Her and Patrick, at least.
Yeah, right. And their relationship was what, 2 years?
I think so, yeah.
And then, yeah, for her to latch on to Patrick that quick, especially like is definitely a suspicious trait of a personality disorder to be like, oh, bam, this person.
But part of why I wanted to name borderline talking about Clementine is I think she's actually a decent, probably the most decent portrayal of that diagnosis that we've seen on screen in the movies we talked about so far, in that she doesn't go full, I'm going to kidnap your kid and cook your rabbit like Fatal Attraction, right?
Right. None
Which
of
is
that.
the other time we've really talked about borderline. And she has a lot of moments in the movie when she's genuinely very caring and loving and positive and supportive and problem solving. And I guess I just wanted to put a pin on that for people because we have such a villainous mainstream concept of borderline. And in actuality, when I've worked with people with borderline, there are a lot of like they're a whole person still, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And I think in Clementine, obviously we see these skewed parts of her because of the, not great reporter, as you're saying, like the unreliable narrator part of it. But I think when we do see the version of her, that's the real life version of her with Patrick, who's really struggling, sweet and great. And I just wanted to make sure to name that because we don't really get that portrayal in TV and movies when they discuss borderline or have a character that has borderline tendencies.
No, we don't. And quite often the distress that they're under when it happens can be more like this, where it's interpersonal, it's emotional blow-ups. There's not necessarily complete villain turns where people's lives are in danger and things are getting broken. It's more interpersonal turmoil, and intrapersonal turmoil. It's just persistent, consistent, and it alternates, but it doesn't. Like most things, movie versions of mentally ill people tend to result in violence, and in real life, it's quite rare. Things happen, but it's not just mental illness that produces that.
Yeah. And I think in Clementine, we see someone that has all these characteristics, but she's also seems to be at times like a good friend and a good partner and a likable person and can be generous. And yeah, I just wanted to make sure to highlight all that because we just don't see that often enough. And it's definitely not talked about in culture enough when someone struggles with these tendencies.
No, not even close to enough.
Is there anything more we wanted to specifically talk about Clementine before we go to our first break?
Nope.
I don't think so. All
right, cool. We'll be right back. All right, so the next character I wanted to make sure to touch upon is our boy Joel. So Joel, we actually do see him. He is our central protagonist of this movie. So thoughts on Joel? I'll put it out there before I give my thoughts. I don't know, Hannah, what did you feel? How did you feel about Joel? Or what were your initial thoughts?
Just that he was really, really depressed. A really depressed guy. He is definitely stuck in a version of his life that he doesn't know how to get out of, seemingly. He doesn't seem to have a lot of awareness about how his behavior affects other people.
Okay.
And I feel like he has a lot of anxiety. He has a lot of anxiety and really gets stuck in ruminating in the film.
Yeah, I think what to me felt really telling from a like information standpoint, like when you get to know a client and you ask them questions and then they'll tell you something and you're like, oh, and it kind of recontextualizes a lot of things for you. I would say with me, for Joel, it was when I found out that he'd had a partner, Naomi, that he was living with. Was he engaged to her or was he almost engaged to her? There was kind of like a little back and forth about that, where I don't know if he was just being dishonest about the status of the relationship or whatever when he was trying to hook up with Clementine in the beginning, or in the beginning of their relationship. But he is someone that I thought at the beginning of the movie, how I was contextualizing him was like, okay, he's someone that has maybe not great natural social skills, is really isolated, doesn't really have a strong sense of self, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depressive stuff, which makes it hard to have a good sense of self. I mean, I think something anxiety also really does to you is it kind of robs you of your ability to hear your intuition and your authentic voice. And so he felt like that to me. And maybe like Clementine was like this bright, sparkly person who showed up and made him feel like someone, right? And pulled him out of his isolation. So when I found out later in the movie, probably on purpose, that he actually maybe cheated and or overlapped those relationships, like Naomi and Clementine, I found that to be really interesting from a like case conceptualization perspective in that what that says to him. Because I think something that's in that for me is very in common between Joel and Clementine is that they are two people that struggle with their sense of self. And as we know with like personality disorders, kind of a like a root criteria of that is struggling with your sense of self and looking for that outside of you. And I think with Joel, we see that as well. And you're right, like he's someone who's crying a lot in his car. I think we see him several times in the movie just crying. I think what's hard in this movie too is because the back and forth of when things are happening, it's hard to discern like what causes what. Because just now I was thinking, well, was he crying in his car because he was like kind of remembering his memories, but not really understanding? But I think he was crying in his car at different moments too, right? Like regardless, I think these symptoms are presenting at different stages in the story. Pre-lacuna, after lacuna, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the timeline is ever clear. What's happening when I think him presenting as depressed consistently across almost all of them was telegraphed.
Yeah.
He was quite obviously low energy, low sense of self, low thoughts about himself, low expectations to feel better. I think he had quite clearly like the negative cognitive triad of CBT, of negative view of self, negative view of the world, and negative view of the future.
Oh, for sure skis. For sure skis. Yeah.
This is another one of those movies where I feel like the writers sat out with the DSM and went, check, check, check.
What did you guys think of the fact that he was already in a relationship when he sought out Clementine?
I have seen this type of thing happen with clients when they are struggling with anxiety, where it becomes almost a fixation point that they start wondering about what it might be like to be in another relationship or another job or another city or another whatever. And when an opportunity presents itself, they may almost find themselves stuck in it, where they get too anxious to get into it, get too anxious to get out of it. And with someone pushy like Clem was, who is latching on, attaching, and intruding herself into wherever his comfort zone may have been and then got obliterated, he probably would be so anxious about all of that that he wouldn't know what to do and what relationship to be in. And I have seen this many times, as I imagine you both have, or any of us who've been alive have seen people get themselves into weird situations where they're so anxious that they can't make a decision and they won't terminate one thing or another that they really need to, be at a job or a relationship. Or like, well, maybe I'll just work 2 jobs, or I'll just try this, or I'll just do that, or and it becomes this irrational web of overactivation that they seek an escape from, but then can't make the decision because the consequences of the decision are perceived to be too drastic, and there is no other side of the world. And when the comorbidity of depression and anxiety happens, you have that negative view of self, negative view of the world, and negative view of the future, plus anxiety. Well, then you're just going to worry that you'll make it worse, whatever you do, which isn't appealing for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right in that he does. I think we all have clients who've done this, and I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I've definitely done this at different parts of my life, and I've been at different places with my anxiety and depression, which is I'm just one external factor away from not feeling like this anymore. So if I just like get a different girlfriend, get a different job, move into a different apartment, then something will magically, intrinsically happen to me. And I won't feel like this anymore. And then you get into that situation and it doesn't change who you are on the inside. And then you either you just keep jumping to another thing, or you spin out because you don't feel any different. I think Joel and Clem kind of follows that, in that he's not happy where he's at. He sees this sparkly, happy, because you're right, Ben. I think I actually said this to you, Hannah, when we were watching it, is like she's kind of perfect for someone in a lot of ways that has his kind of social anxiety, and that she will make all the decisions. She will do all the initiating. She will do all of the hard work that when you have anxiety, it can be hard for you to take those first steps. So she takes all that effort away from him. And she's so like full of life, right? And then it's kind of when people, I don't know, this is sort of more of internet way of saying it, but you marry a baddie and then you're mad that they're a baddie. And that like he gets with someone like Clementine and then he resents the way she actually is. And she doesn't make him feel better all the time or even overall. So then he starts to resent her. And then that leads to these fights where he is unhappy with her. He's picking at her, and then she's picking at him for the reasons you brought up earlier, Ben. And then it kind of leads to this place where they're just both so unhappy. And then they go to this extreme, which is I'm just going to extinguish you from my brain. But yeah, I think Joel is just, I think I love the inclusion in this movie of the speech that Clem gives twice, actually, which is like, I am a whole person. I'm not a concept, which is a really enlightened, insightful thing for her to say. And very unfortunately accurate for Joel to not hear that, even though she says it loud and seems to see it several times at the very onset of their relationship, that she is not someone to change him. She's not like a concept. Yeah. And she's wanting someone, I think, like we all do, she's wanting someone who will love her whole self, not how she makes them feel. And I think that is actually wildly insightful on Clementine's part, probably more of like movie writing. But it's interesting because which is maybe this is the point of the writing, but you start kind of more on Joel's side because Clementine seems so off-putting. And then by the time that speech and stuff comes around, I was like fully on, not that I'm supposed to pick a side, but I was like, fuck Joel. Even though we're all full of compassion for all the characters and who they represent, it's like, I think maybe because I'm a woman that like I understand that perspective of like how people will be used by who they can be to someone else and not necessarily as like a full person.
Yeah.
Yep. And when you get the introvert versus extrovert, let alone when there's depression or personality disorder or trauma history, which I know I've said it on other episodes where we've mentioned borderline before, but there's been consideration in even the APA with whether or not borderline personality disorder needs to continue to exist or something else needs to be developed to replace it, because it seldom exists without chronic trauma. So the ability to better explain it in a way that is less stigmatizing may come by the time the next DSM rolls out, who knows when. But the thing that I have seen multiple times, disorders and diagnoses aside, is when you have an introvert and an extrovert in a relationship with each other and there's high needs and high emotional needs and history of not getting those needs met, is essentially becomes one person who wants to do nothing more than turtle up into their shell, and another one whose inner self is kind of like a little kid trying to stick their hand into the shell and pull the turtle out. And the turtle retreats further and further, and they reach in more and more and intrude more and more on their space, when they would both get further if one moved closer and the other moved back. But neither will ever do it. Instead, they will continue to do this pattern of retreat and pursue, retreat and pursue, retreat and pursue, because Clem and people like her feel extreme anxiety that their needs will never be met, and they need to know if this person's ever going to meet their needs. So they start pushing them out of their comfort zone, because whatever's going on inside of their mind tells them this person can be it. They just aren't, and they need a push to get there. So I'm going to push them. And that person, their partner, is always going, if you could please just stop pushing me all of the time beyond my comfort zone, I might be able to meet your needs if I could get a minute and an inch to breathe. And it becomes a chronic pattern that goes poorly until we move closer together.
Yeah, I've been thinking about what you said about borderline being recontextualized as like a trauma diagnosis and like a future DSM, and I do hope they do that for the reasons you're bringing up. And this is sparking a memory for me as well, no pun intended, of how in the movie Clementine does say, and she says it very nonchalantly as if this is just like a fact of life, how when you're a kid, you don't matter. But she says that like that's everyone's childhood experience. Like how she hated being a kid, because she says it to Joel, like, yeah, because when you're a kid and like you don't matter. And I was like, ooh, Clementine, you just accidentally said something very telling. Like that feels like something someone would say in my office, thinking they weren't saying anything profound. And I would be like, oh, we're about to spend the next 3 to 5 sessions talking about what you just said. Because when you're a kid, that's the time in your life when you should feel like you matter, if nothing else. And the fact that that is how she felt as a kid and felt desperate not to be in that situation, I think says a lot about why she is presenting the way she is as an adult. And like segueing this back into Joel, I think too, where the movie does really clever as well is it also has its own little, what's the word I'm looking for? Little like not Easter eggs, but they drop little stuff here and there about him as a kid too, and how it seemed like when he was young, maybe he suffered from like separation anxiety, but it's very clear also with Joel that his anxiety and his feelings of security presented as well at a very young age.
Yep. I think we see some hints and clues that Joel may have possibly been alternately overcoddled and then
maybe a little neglected.
Maybe a little neglected at other times, so that it became kind of an insecure attachment type of scenario where mom was both, like alternately present and not.
Yeah.
So it became really, really difficult for him to be sure of what to do in order to get attention. And if it was safer to retreat, then he'd retreat.
When he says no one, when he's in his little kid mode, he said no one, he whines like no one looks at me. And if I really wanted to extrapolate out from that one scene, it sounds like his mom was very willing to like have Joel physically with her all the time. But she was also making like vodka cocktails at an early hour of the day. So maybe she was a mom that like was physically very present, but mentally on vacation. And that does create a lot of confusion for kids.
Yep. That can create insecure attachment, because it'll be that thing where mom's here, but she's not. And then
absolutely.
I'm not sure what to do to get my needs met, because my mom is here, but my mom is also assigning someone else to care for me while I'm here. And can you look after him? And, even if it's not, it could be, she's kind of mentally on vacation, or she's not mature enough to accept the role of parent and is still trying to live, that childless life where you kind of have freedom to do whatever you want. And once you have a kid, that is just not true. But some parents don't accept that. And they're like, no, I can still party. And no.
Yeah. Bring your baby to the bar is kind of the idiom.
Yep. Like, nope.
Yeah. And I think how we see it then from Joel as an adult is, which makes me feel for Clementine just because it's a bad pairing, is that he does all these sort of like passive aggressive shit to her, right? Like that's part of how that insecure attachment can present is I don't feel good right now in our relationship. But instead of just appropriately communicating that to you. I'm going to wait up all night until you get home. And then once you're actually here, I'm going to leave the room in a huff, even though I've been waiting for hours for you to show up. I'm going to make little shitty comments that make you feel bad about yourself and passive aggressive comments. But then when you actually try to address it, I shut down. It's that very like push pull thing that is very, well, she's not good communication. And it would spin any partner out. But then you combine that with Clementine, someone who has their own intra and interpersonal stuff going on. That's just like a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
It sure is. And then what we haven't brought up at all is her quite apparent alcohol problem.
Well, yeah, she's drunk driving. It made me curious if that is a chronic thing or that was just like another version of just like not making the best decisions. Because I don't know if I saw, unless I totally missed something, like more than that in terms of like, I mean, would I be shocked if she had a substance use issue? Absolutely not. But I didn't know if I saw a ton of evidence to suggest that besides that fight.
Oh, there was a ton. They alluded to it constantly. She always has a drink. She's focused on drinking a lot. She's pushing him to drink more in a couple scenes, seeking alcohol when no one else is. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that there is some degree of alcohol problem. Whether it's to the degree of disorder or not is for debate, but I think it's clear that she has an issue, and that has definitely been an issue for Joel, for remembering that most of this is from his memories. He doesn't like it.
That's a good point. I think I was just putting it under like, she also, just to place me within the context of this movie, she's such like the hipster cool girl that I think I might have just been putting it under like that umbrella in my brain, but you make a good point, Ben.
I mean, she wrecked his car. She's wasted a lot.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah. I mean, if she's seeking to escape something, she's likely to turn to substance use to mute it inside her head. And I think we see enough evidence of that, and that he is uncomfortable with it. And once she's back in his world and those tapes are playing in the background, him finding that whiskey bottle for her and trying to find like a different point of acceptance within himself did not feel like an accident in the writing to me. Where he was trying to go, oh, I thought there was more. When he hands her just like that little bit that's left, to me, that indicated him trying to accept her more as she is for something he really doesn't like about her. Because again, we don't know how accurate that perception of her is, but obviously her alcohol use bothers him, and he's trying to show some acceptance. So factoring that into how much more of an emotional episode we're likely to get if somebody's drunk and disinhibited complicates things, right?
No, for sure. I mean, I guess it's kind of me talking about final thoughts a little bit, but I don't think I've ever rooted for a couple less in a movie that's supposed to be romantic in nature. I don't know how you guys felt, but
I mean, I did not find myself rooting for anyone in this film.
Fair.
And in a film full of so many Batman villains, I had I had a plethora to choose from. Just so very sad that Mr. Frodo was the raving villain of them all here.
Oh yeah,
but this is definitely like the superhero movie greatest hits.
I guess so. I don't think like that, buddy.
I mean, we had Kirsten Dunst.
Oh, she is in Spider-Man.
Yeah, dude, 3 of them. We had the doctor. I forgot his name. He was Falcone in Batman Begins. We have Jim Carrey as the Riddler.
Oh yeah.
Well, we just got a plethora of them, and we have Mark Ruffalo, aka the Hulk. Yeah, I did not root for anybody. I found myself rooting for like, go to therapy, all of you.
Yes.
And also prosecute. The medical team.
Yeah. Well, I guess on that note, we can take a break there, because that sounds like a segue into our next topic, which is the quote unquote treatment that we are being seen in this movie, the lacuna procedure, if you will. So we'll take a break here and we'll be right back. All right. I think my note on this was classic American not dealing is what I wrote about this procedure. So just to remind everyone again, this procedure basically is they figure out, well, you get to request what you don't want to remember, and they just like zap that out of your brain with this expectation that no one will ever bring it up again. It seems very sloppy, which I guess is the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's got to be satirical at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really curious because you're kind of more of the behavioral science person of the three of us, Ben, and the work that you've done with like EMDR, but I guess you also are familiar with parts of this too, Hannah. I just was watching, I don't know, just watching this movie and just thinking about like how, well, one, unethical, which we'll talk about, but just how troubling it felt to me that people were losing important memories, and therefore like the butterfly effect that would have on their sense of self, their senses of attachment, wisdom that we gain, making future decision making. It was really upsetting me from like a therapeutic perspective to really think about, if people did this in real life, how like the potential detriment of it.
Well, the detriment of it is enormous. We go through ever. Some memories that aren't assigned an emotion fall into irrelevance and kind of go into that space where we saw in the Inside Out, where memories start to get pruned.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't remember what route you took through the grocery store 3 weeks ago, or what song you heard on the way to work on a Wednesday, March 18th last year. You don't remember those things because they didn't elicit enough of an emotional response to be encoded by your brain as relevant. But everything that we go through that gets assigned an emotion must be processed. Every bit of information we intake like that must be digested, like every bit of food you ingest must be digested. I would absolutely love it if I could eat a pizza and only digest the calories and nutrient content I needed to not gain weight and sustain my body. But if I eat an entire pizza, I am going to have to fully digest all 12,000 calories of that pizza, and I can't pick and choose. No, I just want like some of the wheat and the pepperoni. Can you like throw out all the calories from the dairy and the tomato sauce? That'd be great.
You sound like my mom, Ben.
Yeah, right.
Almond mom.
Right. This is not a thing. I wish I could eat whatever I want and take the nutrient content from it, but it doesn't work like that. And our memories don't work like that either. We need all of our experiences, good and bad, because they teach us what to do again and what to not do, very simply.
Mm-hmm.
And avoidance of that robs us of things we're supposed to have and supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. No, it kind of, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you think, Hannah, because I know that you focus a lot on like dissociation in the work that you do. Like it was kind of really reminding me of like the beginning parts of it more, where they were getting like, well, I guess it was happening throughout, but like Clem and Joel at like post memory loss, if you will, like how they were still having these like strong emotional reactions, still feeling like anxious at times and dysregulated. Still feeling pulled to certain things, even though the root memory, if you will, was gone. And it makes me think of, I'm still growing in my understanding of dissociation, but it makes me think of how when I work with clients who can't pull memories for me because of dissociation, they still have sort of like the emotional residuals, if you will, of the memory, and how one, like that in itself can be dysregulating because it can be very confusing to like not know why you feel the way you feel about in certain times. And it doesn't feel empowering to not know why you're upset in that way too. And so I don't know. I was curious what you thought about that part of it, or if I'm on the mark at all with that.
I think that, I don't know. I don't think that, I don't know if that feels like it connects to how I think about it. because I feel like they're so you're talking about after when they realize when they're trying to get away from the memories getting erased.
No, I'm talking more about how post memory loss, post procedure, Clem is still really dysregulated. You can tell that she knows something's wrong. Something's missing,
Oh,
something's not working.
yes.
And there are also moments like in the very beginning of the movie, Joel is still like emotional, anxious, shut down, right? And that there's still like the quote unquote messy emotional part happening, even though the memory is not something that they're cognizant of anymore.
Okay. So what you're talking about then is just them experiencing the thoughts, the emotions that are connected to it. Even though they can't tell that that's what the memory brought up.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess that could kind of be like dissociation. Dissociation is just so tricky because when it's happening, people can't tell when it's happening. And so it's really tricky in terms of you can usually tell later on, you can have some awareness about it, but it's really hard to tell in the moment when dissociation is happening. So I feel like in terms of I lost my train of thought.
I guess the point that I make is that it's an interesting demonstration, kind of similar to when I work with people who struggle with dissociation, where even though the memory is not retained for whatever reason, the emotionality still exists. And there can still be emotion attached to the memory, even though the memory is not really like hanging out there anymore. That's just been my experience working with people who struggle with that. And I think it's interesting because that we see that in the movie because it does fly in the face of the convention of the procedure, right? This idea that if I don't remember what upset me anymore, that all of the residual emotionality of it and all of my like connections to certain places and things, triggers, I guess, that'll all go away. And I think what the movie actually demonstrates well is that's not true. That you will still experience the emotional aspects of it, even though like the root cause, if you will, is not available to you any longer or ever was. If none of this is making sense, you guys can just cut me out.
I get what you're trying to say, and some of it is online, and some of it I think is just not touching it quite enough in a way that resonates, that it clicks.
Okay.
I understand fully what you're asking. I think what you're seem to be indicating to me is like wondering if we absolve the visual aspects of this memory, does it absolve the emotional aspects?
Yeah.
And does that last with how memory processing works, or can it be re-triggered again when other stimuli? And I find myself wondering if you were looking at the way they seem to be doing this as a visual removal only. And that wasn't the sense I got from it at all.
Well, I guess I don't really understand how they think they're doing it in the movie, because they talk about like memory mapping, and they talk about how they're taking memory away from Joel and Clementine and other people. But it seems like the emotional part of it is lingering for people, right? Like kind of the way that, I don't know, not to get too woo-woo, but the memory sort of like seeps into your deeper self. I don't know if that makes sense, but how like, even though, I don't know, where it kind of connects for me too is more of this like very Western idea that if I can solve the problem that's upsetting me, which in this movie is the memories, right? This relationship that fucked me up, that there will be a trickle down effect where I don't feel bad anymore. And all the shit that I've connected to this memory, this experience, this relationship will go away. And I think what I appreciate the movie does is it does not reward that idea. It very repeatedly says, even with like for example, Mary, Kirsten Dunst's character, like that we don't just get fixed if we can identify the problem and solve the problem. That's something I find a lot with my clients as well. This idea that, well, if I can just take space, avoid, solve, whatever the thing that's bothering me, then it won't impact me any longer. And as we know, like, that's not a truth.
Isn't. This is why I think probably me and Hannah are like, who do work more in this area, are kind of trying to track your questions. Going like, what? Which are, it's fair because I know you haven't done as much of training and focus on especially like CPTSD level trauma and how that shit gets encoded in the brain. And I think the movie, to me, what it was showing me was that they are trying to address that memory exists in multiple lobes in the brain, and it's remembering that we have different neurological centers of memory that are responsible for different senses. And that much like when we watch a movie, something is recorded on multiple tracks and then combined into a combined experience for us. So we get sound effects, we get music, we get the visual, we get the audio track of the actors speaking. All of that is combined into one experience for us. But when you break it down into its components, it is all of those things being recorded separately, presented to us together. And our memory works like that. It will break down. Like, so you can experience an event, but you're going to record it in different spots of your brain. Like, it's why a smell can trigger you. Because you went through an event, and let's say it was a fire, right? You're going to have the visual of what the fire looked like. You're going to have the audio of what the fire looked like. You're going to have the touch sense of what it felt like to be near a fire, or what you breathed in and how it felt in your lungs. You're going to have smell. All of those senses are going to combine. Those are going to be all recorded in different lobes of your brain. We have different lobes that are responsible for different senses, right? So when we go through a traumatic event, all of that gets encoded as relevant and combined with an emotional response so that we remember it. And then it can all get played together, but it can also be accessed separately. Just the smell can re-trigger, bam, take you back. A person who's been in a house fire before might struggle to be around campfires. And they might struggle to be in the country when there's leaf burning going on, because the smell will hit them and all of a sudden they'll have a triggered reaction. Their body will then flash them to go, last time you smelled something burning like this, you were in danger. You should probably remember and access all of those files right now of what it felt like to be in danger the last time you spent this, because you might need them to respond to another fire so you don't get burned again. Does that make sense? So yeah. I think the way you're framing the question doesn't quite encapsulate the reality of how it encodes in a way that is easy to answer. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's a different interpretation than what made sense to me watching this movie. Like, it's not, it wasn't like they're shining a flashlight on it and trying to blind them from being able to see these stimuli. It was, they were trying to go into the brain and find, and they were showing the neural networking of connecting the dots with the little lines. And in doing that, it looked like to me, they were trying to actually sort of represent the neuroscience that shows that there is interconnectivity between our senses and our memories, and that can be tremendously complicated and difficult to track with what will combine with what. It's why in EMDR and some other trauma work, you do a process that has different names. I'm going to use the EMDR one, but different sensory motor has a different name for it, and so do several others, but it's called the float back in EMDR. What we do is we ask someone to think of a recent event. They were upset or whatever the example situation is. And I want you to notice what you feel or notice what you see when you think of that image. I want you to notice what you feel in your body and where you feel it. I want you to notice any other stimuli, what you see, hear, feel, smell when you think about that. I want to know the negative thought you have about yourself, because we're going to try to access this on all of the different levels of cognition and sensory experience that might be getting triggered. And then I want you to float back to an earlier time where you may have felt something similar. And it is a fantastic exercise, because when you do that with people, you keep refocusing them on what do you feel in your body? What are the negative thoughts? What are all the sensory experience, all those questions, and you go back, 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 back. And when you do find a root, I think the other thing about these kinds of trauma theories is the question you're asking is sort of antithetical to what these therapies are trying to do. No, I can't delete it out of your mind. That's not real. But what I can do is help you find the memory that didn't get processed, because when you dissociated, that memory fragmented. There was a part of it that you couldn't deal with at that moment because your system was overloaded trying to survive. But your brain went into split brain processing, where you cognitively understood what was going on and were recording, and then there was the felt sense of what was going on. So what you just had to survive, because your brain runs in a split capacity. So when you're calm and listening to a show like this, you're probably not getting super triggered right this second. So your intellectual side of your brain is on. You're able to look at things and understand them and evaluate them and look at it. But when you are in a situation where your defense system is on, it is pulling power away from your ability to think scientifically, and it is throwing you into full reactionary mode, because it has identified a threat you need to survive now. And surviving that threat may take you abandoning some other parts of your sense of self. What if the person trying to kill you right now is your child? What then? What part of you wins out? The parent part or the part that wants to live? That has become cleared as a deadly situation. Let's say it's an adult child. This adult child is going to kill you. They are wielding a deadly weapon. They have lost sense of reality. They are actively trying to kill you. They are not responding to, and now they are moving towards your spouse and you. What do? Your body will take over and make a decision for you.
Yeah.
And that's what dissociation is. It's different when you're dissociating away from present stimuli in a moment. And it's, I think, why Hannah was like, dissociation is so complicated. It's such a big topic to answer. But when you're dissociating in the moment, the part of you that's a parent may have to turn off, so the part of you that survives can find a weapon and eliminate a threat.
Okay.
So that's a dark and fucked up example, but there is no reality where you can erase things. But what you can do is get them out of the state-dependent form they were stored in when they fragmented, because you couldn't deal with it then. But when you understood what happened when you got out of that mode, now you need to be able to digest it. And that split brain processing, those two halves of your brain now need to come together and both create a shared understanding of what happened, a debriefing, if you will, of the event, so that your emotional side can learn to deactivate and your intellectual side can understand what to do next time it encounters that threat, so it feels like that threat is resolved. But that's why sometimes when something happens, if somebody gets triggered, let's go back to that fire example, you smell that smell and start freaking out that you might be able to not get away from it, you will dissociate away from the moment of what you are in and just respond to the danger you feel. It is perception based. It has nothing to do with thought. And that's why when people try to treat trauma with just cognitive approaches, it drives me nuts, because you're not resolving the body response that's engaging inappropriately, because a part of the memories that are stuck in danger are now driving the body. And if you can't help them see that they are not needed because they are not in, the body is not in danger at this moment. It was in that one, but we are not now. Now is not then. You get nowhere. And this movie did an interesting job of exploring the human will side of things, where someone isn't ready or willing to let go of a memory that hurts them, that they will not process it. And I have seen that many times. Where clients, for whatever reason, and they get choice on this. There's no judgment. I don't choose for clients if they're ready for that or not. There can be really complicated things that might cause someone to not be willing to move on from an image that's torturing them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my decision to tell them to let go of. But that's what I saw when I saw Joel like pushing this memory around through and attaching it to different things. He's basically running it through his different attachment cycles. Like, no, I can't let this go because it's part of my attachment. It's part of my understanding of how I get my needs met is her. Mm-hmm. So I can't let her go, and therefore they won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you going into all that. I feel like I successfully went on it, put us on a tangent. But yeah, I think going back to like this procedure in itself, like you bring up a great point, which is part of the ethical part of this, right? Which is well, here's what I will say. I don't think anybody at the Lacuna office, I'll call it, seems to have any sort of therapeutic training of any kind. I don't even know if they have technical medical training the way that they were behaving. They didn't seem to be worried about anything HIPAA, ethic, do no harm, if you will. And I think part of it, what you're bringing up, is that when Joel so clearly is resisting the treatment, they do have that all or nothing approach, right? Like you signed the dotted line, you decide. It'd be like if a client came into our office and they were like, I really want to work on my trauma and like work through it and like make coping skills and all stuff. And then when we start to bring up like their trauma, like you were saying, Ben, if they like start to feel panicked about that or get upset or just change their mind, that they call the shots, right? Like they are in charge. And that's part of working with people who've had trauma, is like you want them to feel safe. And part of feeling safe is feeling in control. And that with the Joel situation, like it's like once you decide you're doing this, bro, you don't ever get to stop. And and that would genuinely be really upsetting. And it makes sense why we see what happens in the movie, which is that he's literally, well, I guess literally in the sense of it's happening in his head, running away, right? Trying to hide, trying to save himself. He's panicked, he's distressed. And there's no procedure, it seems, with the medical team, if you want to call them that, to be like, oh, he's not ready, or oh, he's panicking, or oh, we have to pull back. It's very like all or nothing.
Well, it's definitely all or nothing. There's so many ethical violations in this that
I mean, there's such like obvious ones, like they're getting shit-faced while they're doing the procedure. They also seem to maybe be getting naked and having sex around him while he is unconscious. They are rifling through his shit, drinking his liquor, eating his food. Like, even from just a professionalism standpoint, couldn't be worse.
Well, and then the Elijah Wood character is literally talking to her on the phone, which is he's going to hear that. You still hear in your sleep, and his brain is going to hear that and then hear another man's voice while talking to her, while hearing her in distress. You want to talk about something that's going to trigger a protective response, even if it's not consciously perceived. And then that's going to trigger a scarcity response that we're already seeing him actually subconsciously longing for her. And now he's detecting her, wanting someone else. And he's already had the experience of her being with this dude, not recognizing him at all and making him feel like dog shit. Yeah. I think, I don't know, timeline's fuzzy on that, but just the unethical ridiculousness of that. Plus, yes, it seems quite obvious that none of them have any therapeutic training whatsoever, questionable medical training, but the technicians running this have obviously not don't have any regard for what they're doing, and it's real bad.
They seem like a bunch of groupies around this doctor who has this idea of how he can help people, and they seem like a bunch of people who are just on board for the ride instead of people who are trying to do something meaningful.
Yeah, they're not concerned. And I think Mark Ruffalo's character likes the equipment,
like the technology of it all.
And Kirsten Dunst's character likes the doctor.
Unfortunately, yes.
And Elijah Wood's character likes
having a job and then taking advantage of that job.
Yeah, I mean, he has his own issues. Well, I'll just say bad person for right now.
I mean, like, that's like the biggest ethical issue in the movie. Well, at least in my perspective, is that doing this kind of procedure, it's not rooted in anything. I mean, it's not a real procedure, right? And so who knows
No.
how
No.
vulnerable someone is after a procedure like this, right? Like, you are fucking with their literal head. You are
Mhm.
like taking away potentially, like we talk about with like inside out, like core memories or like things that attach to their sense of self. So I think there's a good argument to be made that people leave this procedure in some ways more dysregulated than why they went in to get the procedure done. And then you have someone like Elijah Wood, similar to the Joel thing, right? Of like, he fell in love with the concept of Clementine. Like, he fell in love with his
Mhm.
perception of her because he was watching her probably like a movie, right? Like through her stories.
Yeah.
And then he took advantage of that information
Mhm.
to probably make her fall into a relationship with him, because he already
Mhm.
knows. So it's like that power dynamic we've talked about before in the therapeutic world, where we are given so much information about someone so quickly, and we can choose to use that information appropriately or not appropriately. And the inappropriate way of using that information is to take advantage of it, like he has. And even
Mhm.
more so in this dynamic, because Clementine doesn't even know how he would know these things. She has no memory. I would assume she has no memory of how she even knows him prior to, I don't know, whatever cute meat he created post treating her.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that 100% plus they're corrupting the procedure by triggering new memories or new versions of this that would absolutely not be erasable and would reactivate these neural pathways
Mhm.
because he's trying to like help her through erasing them, but he's also attaching himself to them by
Mm-hmm.
repeating them while she's trying to erase them and deactivate them.
Yeah.
So they're not going to deactivate. And I am, even if this procedure were real, if there were any degree of science done to it at all, it would be with the idea of removing these stimuli, which they clearly go through a point to do by starting to burn the pictures and stuff, that
Mm-hmm.
they're reviewing the memories and then destroying them. So
Mm-hmm.
by reactivating them while they're in the process, let's say there'd be a cool down period of trying to deactivate and destroy these memories. Elijah Wood's character, by doing all of the things that Joel did with her that made her fall in love with him, is not
Mhm.
allowing them to close those
Mm.
loops
Yeah.
and would
Yep.
therefore be corrupting it. And then them having sex and doing other stuff and um, having her voice enter into the picture is not allowing the grief parts of his brain that do accept when something is over and someone is gone. We do have a mechanism for that. That's what grieving is for. That's why in our funeral rituals, so often we wake a body so that people who have difficulty accepting that someone is gone can look upon their body and see that they are not moving,
Mm-hmm.
that they do not look alive anymore. And then they start to accept it. Then they have a big emotional burst and a realization of, well, damn,
Mm-hmm.
there they are. And they let go. And with that happening, we trigger the parts of our brain that are capable of grieving. As a species, we came equipped to move beyond things, since everyone and everything we encounter in our life will go away. Everything. We have to be able to continue to survive and adapt. So we come with mechanisms for that. But they corrupted the accessing of that, which ruins the science. And if the doc had set this up in any way that was ethical, that would have been covered.
Mm-hmm. And also, this procedure feels so impossible given all the elements to it that you can't control for. Like you were talking
Yeah.
about, like, you bring all the shit that you have in your apartment that was theirs, right? Like, you get rid of all like the obvious triggering stimuli. And then you give note cards out to all of the friends and family you can think of that might mention this person, right?
Right.
But we see right away that that gets fucked up because there's a neighbor who brings up Clementine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what also where this kind of reminds me of more of that, like, more of like how we like to think we're interjecting like logic onto onto multifaceted emotional therapeutic things, is like you can't control for everything.
Nope.
And there's going to be stuff that happens that then you need tools to deal with those things that you can't control for. And the idea in this movie by these doctors, quote unquote, the Lacuna people, that they can create a world externally as well, in which Joel, Clementine, whoever, will never accidentally be confronted or confused by or whatever, is so hubris, like the hubris of that, the arrogance of that. And that's unethical as well, because you're also selling a product that you can't actually deliver on. Because I don't know, I might be making this up because I've only seen this. This is only the second time I've ever seen this movie, but were they coming in to do like brush up work with Joel because he did have that like that neighbor thing happened? Like, do they have to do like upgrades or updates?
It seemed that way.
Happen that does, like, so it's like, how long is this going on for? You know, like, what if they go out of business and then what happens? Like, you know what I mean, to the clientele afterwards. It just is such a unrealistic approach to dealing with something, you know?
It's terribly unrealistic.
Yeah.
I think the point of real therapy that I want to point out is that the difference between what EMDR and trauma work tries to do is resolve a stuck memory, a fragmented part that got stuck in crisis, that's still there, that still lives there. It never got a chance to recognize all of the growth that happened. Janina Fisher would put it this way, sort of like that a part of them, let's say something happened when they were a child, that child part stayed at that developmental place and kept away from the rest of the parts. It just stayed right where it was to be accessed as needed for its perspective on things. And it didn't necessarily get to go with the rest of the body and the rest of the psyche on a journey through development and see all the growth that's happened since then. It only gets activated and chimes in from the perspective of a traumatized child. We shouldn't do this. This is dangerous. This is scary. And then the behavioral response that the adult body does is informed by that child, as opposed to all of the growth that has happened in, let's say, its 45-year-old body. It's a powerful experience to be able to bring that part out of its isolated spot and be able to interact and see all the growth that has happened since that time. And that is essentially what trauma therapies do. That's certainly what EMDR tries to do. I know that's what sensory motor tries to do. And that's, and I don't even speak on what kind of IFS does something similar of looking at that, but it's bringing out these parts that are stuck and isolated and helping them reassimilate and like be valid in their own space, but not need to be there as active anymore. We're not reassimilate. We're going to delete that. Reassimilate is absolutely the wrong term. I'm sure you're about to tell me that. I know that's the wrong term. We don't do that. No.
Well, and you know, in some ways, IFS, the goal is integration, but the goal of integration is so far down the road. It's not something that you can just do, you know, like right off the bat. You have to do, and so what they call it in IFS is unburdening. You unburden a part from the experience that they had. The trauma that they experienced, and you unburden those parts so that they're able to create to have a new role, to do something different in terms of taking care of you instead of what they were doing before, or trying to protect you from, or hiding you from, or whatever it is that part thought it was trying to do for you.
Like recontextualizing what it means to take care of you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And giving it a valid and powerful spot that justifies and validates its existence without taking meaning away from it, because what it's not going to do is stop protecting you. But if you give it a new way to do that is functional, then it will latch onto that. And whether it's through IFS language or sensory motor language or in EMDR language, it would be like the unburdening is working through the desensitization phase. So you're taking away the distress, no matter which way you're phrasing it. That's what you're doing. You're taking the distress away so that you can then, in EMDR, you're working on rebuilding new language around it so that you're creating a new thought process. You can create a new and healthy buildup. So you deactivate the distress and then you build up a new and healthy way to look at it. That in EMDR, it's the same thing as Hannah's mentioning. You don't try to take away the experience. You never take away. You work on reframing and adjusting the way it's thought about, the way it can be carried in a way that looks at it more balanced. I think one of the things that Jim Carrey's acting and some of them, like the memories trying to save themselves, etc., is very accurately illustrating the way parts will behave, is that they all have a function that's meaningful and has been part of survival, and they're not gonna, just like you don't unlearn what something hot feels like. But once you learn that, you never unlearn it, right? You don't go back and touch a hot thing again and wonder if it still feels like hot.
I think what's so wild about this procedure that they claim to be able to do is that it's so inaccurate and made up, and so it just doesn't work like that. Like, it just doesn't work like that. And they can't, and as much as I know it's just like a part of the film and it's just like this thing that they're pointing out that they can do, but it just doesn't work that way in real life. There isn't something where we can go through and delete our unhappy memories of a certain person or unhappy memories of growing up or whatever it might be. They have to be processed. They have to be processed. The fact that any, again, interesting idea for a film, sure, absolutely. But in terms of, is this something that can be done? Is this something that's realistic? Is this no fucking way. This is not, it's not how it works. It's also not effective. It's also not helpful.
And if this existed in real life, it would stress me out. I did wrote in my notes, like, this would be our biggest competitor if technology like this came out. Like, it would completely rival therapy, and it would tap into, like I said, the sort of like a Western ideology that you just have to like problem solve your emotions.
Yeah.
And how, like you were saying, like, to take it away, it does so many things that trouble me. And one of those things is, it just, like we said, like, it disempowers. Well, like I said, it just reinforces this idea that we can't live well or live healthy if certain things have happened to us. And if we retain those memories, instead of this more, like you guys have been talking about, like integrated self, which is that things can happen to us. Things will probably happen to us at varying degrees of traumatic,
Things will happen to us.
Well, that's what I mean, like to varying degrees of trauma. And this idea that this technology would sell, which is that you can't both retain those memories and lived experiences and be like a happy, healthy person, is so terrifying. Like, and goes against what we believe as mental health practitioners, which is that all those things can be true, and that what we try to do is help people not necessarily do. I hate when people say, like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that's like a really invalidating, stupid thing to say. No offense to everybody who's ever said it. Because what doesn't kill you definitely can fuck your shit up and be something you did not have to go through to be stronger, or maybe you aren't stronger, and that's also okay. But like, where I'm going with that though is, like, going through some of the experience, we do gain skills sometimes, and strengths, and parts of our identity comes from that, right? And this is a very, like, throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is also very like troubling and upsetting. And also too, like I would be so anxious about, but I like where I got the most like freaked as from a child therapist perspective is when he was hiding Clemmy, right, in these other memories where she doesn't belong.
Yeah.
And the scene where he's being bathed in the sink, and it's clearly like a very happy memory where he feels very content, very secure and loved to his mother. And the idea that they were going to take that away from him, like I felt like my heart stopped a little bit. Like I was like, they're going to fuck with him like from root up. Like the fact that someone could go into your head and willy-nilly, because you've given them permission, so to speak,
Yeah.
could then fuck with parts of your identity that are so tied to like your ability to feel secure. And how we do know that how important our young relationships are to our feelings of security, our sense of self, all those things. And the idea that someone could just take that away from you, like take that memory, like I could have screamed. Like that was like a horror movie moment to me. I was like, don't take that memory from him. Like, who knows the trickle effect that would have on him as a person if you were to take that from them. And
Tragic.
Truly tragic, and that would have its own repercussions that would totally outdo him not having to deal anymore with the idea of being broken up with by Clemmy. And not even broken up with, but he seemed more like he was responding to the betrayal of her forgetting him or choosing to forget him. And
both.
It just, I continue to talk about the ethics of it. I can't imagine that they're not constantly seeing patients who are in a moment of like distress and impulsive driven distress, and how these moments, like when Clemmy was going there and when Joel was going there, obviously, are these people that are making this wild decision about their brain and their memory as a band-aid
oh my God.
to a crisis. Ooh, like from an ethics standpoint, we could talk about that all day. Like that is so upsetting.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, and we wouldn't be able to regulate that in this country because we can't even regulate like guns in terms of like people buying them on a whim.
Yeah.
And so the idea that on a whim people would go to, and they probably prey on people who are in these levels of distress, right? Like that's where it feels more like a pain clinic, where they're taking advantage of vulnerable people to make money and like further their research probably too. And not considering that they're also like, I would imagine the demographic they serve is people who are probably way more dysregulated, way more probably in like the personality disorder, mental health spectrum, because they are seeking out an extreme solution to a situation that they don't feel like they can handle themselves. And like I said, it's coming from a disempowerment mindset as well. Like you can't possibly learn how to live with this and learn how to manage it. You need it taken away from you. And that's so toxic and feels so American in a specific way. And maybe I'm just also like thinking of like how many fucking medication commercials I see on a regular basis for medications that I'm familiar with because of the work I do. And I'm like, I can't believe there's a commercial for just like lay people to see, to encourage them to take one medication for their brain versus another. And how this just feels like a evolution of that in a way that is so upsetting as a clinician.
There's a lot of things. And there's three more things on like this, the ethics things that I want to cover. I guess two of them are kind of the same thing, but any testing, any procedure that is cleared and available to do must be two things. It must be valid, must have validity, and it must have reliability. In other words, it must do what it's supposed to do, and it must do so with a predictable chance of success. People do sell things that are not FDA regulated all the fucking time.
Oh, yeah.
And
I just listened to a
podcast
about mid-level marketing that was all about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, like, all sorts of shit. They will sell you all sorts of shit. I've had clients that have tried stuff like, I don't believe this one is FDA approved. The ganglion block thing where they can like give you a essentially a numbing shot on your ganglion nerve to kind of.
Oh,
Yep.
I thought you were gonna say like St. John's wort,
No, well, that too. Fuck that shit.
which is also unregulated, and people don't realize that.
Yep. Any supplement is
Mhm.
unregulated and unsafe. Necessarily, not necessarily unsafe, but like now guarantee of
Risky,
safety.
yeah.
It's risky, yes. But the ganglion block is an example that they'll do that. And could it be a valid option? Sure. But is it FDA approved? No. Which will the insurance cover it? No. TMS does have transmagnetic simulation does have FDA approval, and that
Mhm.
seems to effectively kind of do the same kind of thing that EMDR is supposed to do of activating a memory while triggering different sides of the brain. It literally transmagnetically, there's a magnet that goes across your head, activating different sides of your brain as you think about a thing, which goes back to what I said about there being two sides of your brain, left and right, left being logical, right being reactionary, and a activated memory is throwing you out of proportion and into dissociated states where you activate defense mode again. And TMS is trying to re-regulate that, where you can physically see and perceive you are in a room in a doctor's office where you are not in fact in danger anymore. And then that is very similar to what EMDR is doing with eye movements, is keeping your attention on a set stimuli that is in a room that is not dangerous, that allows your senses to perceive that while accessing the memory that's stuck, so it can no longer exist in the space it's in. And TMS does that and is FDA regulated. But those things have been some of those have been shown to have validity and reliability, meaning through research, they've been shown to do what they say they will do. The ethical problem we have with this movie is that the doctor fucking knows it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And that was the entire purpose of his wife showing up.
Yep.
And something,
Exactly.
Brittany, that triggered in my head while you were talking about this was the ethical violation of sharing people's information that X, Y, and Z person has deleted you out of their brain. Remember, the doctor said she shouldn't have done that. That's a quick throwaway. But you know what that tells me is she went through that procedure again.
Mm-hmm.
Because
she's
sitting
been through
there
the
in his
procedure
office.
several times.
She's
been
I mean,
through
like
this
even the ethics
several
of
times.
that.
Well,
Like having an affair with your boss and then he's the one that deletes your memory and goes through that with you. Anyway, go ahead, Hannah. I could go on that.
no, totally insane. 100%. The only thing I was going to say is that TMS is not as effective as EMDR. Not even close. It's like it's like 50%, maybe. And I cannot believe that they pay for that over paying for medication that's new that might actually help somebody.
Yep. And it's expensive as hell. But insurance will cover it. But that's one of those things that's sold kind of like this idea of is that, well, it'll do this. Same with ketamine therapy. Like people will pay exorbitant amounts of money for that. And like I have seen it work and I've seen it not work.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Well, I've only seen it work.
Yeah.
So far.
I mean,
people that have done it.
The phrase that gets used a lot in all of our Psych 101 stuff is the magic bullet, right? Which I can't believe we haven't said till now, which is this idea that there's a magic bullet within psychology of like, once we just find that magical thing, that it will revolutionize psychology and you'll just be like better instantaneously. And I think there are certain things we like the MDR, for example, that are like getting closer to something that feels like prognostically, much more, I guess, like stable in terms of results, but there's nothing that's going to be what this movie's selling, which, well, obviously it's not selling that hard because it doesn't work, but I guess that's where we can, like I said, where we can give the movie credit is like the procedure it's selling is not effective.
No, but yeah, I mean, it's a real thing to bring up that a person with credentials can be unethical and be untrained and can offer a solution that is neither valid nor reliable, but still charge money for it. And it can be something that gets sold from their own reasons and to clients or patients if it's going to be helpful to them and solve their problems in a way that feels like it generates hope. That's really tragically unfair that it is that magic bullet, that it will make it go away, and that we can just do this, as opposed to empowering them to realize that everything you've already been through, you've survived. You already had enough. You don't need anything extra to have survived it, but we do need to do the work to help your body be able to deactivate its alarm systems that are afraid you'll go back to being in the spot where you were that hurt, and that you aren't in fact as powerful as you've become, that you are still the version of yourself that got hurt. And you aren't, but getting the body and the psyche to accept that simultaneously is a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think Mary's a great example of why this kind of idea doesn't work, is because she just keeps repeating the same mistake, if you will, that she keeps getting into a situation with the doctor, right? And so I think going back to what we've been talking about from like a disempowerment perspective, is that, like when we were talking, even like referencing Inside Out, is that there's so much that we can also gain from going through something hard, which is that you learn and you grow. And like, I'll just keep using like Clementine as an example, you know, to remember the relationship with Joel. If she were to go to therapy, like actual therapy, is she can recall on that relationship to learn from it and figure out like, what can I do differently moving forward so that I don't end up in this kind of relationship again, or engage, or I don't act this way in a relationship again. And when you take that away from someone, what do you do? Like, where do you go from there? Like, you don't ever grow. I don't know how you grow. I don't know how you learn. I don't know how you like figure things out without that. Like, you can't process because you have nothing to process, which is a wild idea. And it like spins me out as a therapist to think about.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's just outrageous. And particularly like seeing how unethically this is practiced. I have seen things practiced like this where, sure, we'll do this thing and then text run it, and then do the text do it to the same degree the doctor does. How dangerous it can become to start messing with people's core memories and ignoring their free will, and them having no way to say, I don't like this.
Yeah.
I don't like what I'm losing. It's not safe for me to lose this. I don't want to.
And the nature of the treatment also negates your ability to do any debriefing work, to do any like aftercare, because they can't know that they even worked with you, right? Because that would undermine the effect of the treatment, right? Because then it would trigger like your curiosity and the parts of us that do want to know what's happened to us, actually.
Right.
And I think what's ironic about this movie is, more often or not, when I work with people who have maybe like dissociated chronically, is that there's more of a desire to uncover and remember than a desire necessarily to forget. And so what this movie is selling is actually quite different than what I typically see. Anyway, I feel like we've been ranting appropriately so about this movie, about this part of the movie for a while. Is there anything else we want to say before we move forward?
Nope.
All right, cool.
I could go on for years, but no.
All right, so we'll take another break here. Okay, so treatment. I think we've done an adequate amount of talking about what treatment doesn't work for this kind of situation. I think the only thing I wanted to say, and this is going way back to talking about Clementine, is that one thing I just want to put on people's radar, if they have borderline personality disorder, or they think they might, or whatever, and they're looking for a like specific treatment, if they're wanting something more specialized, I just wanted to put on people's radar like DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. It is a modality that has evidence-based and has been found to be really helpful with people that have borderline personality disorder. It was actually created by Marsha Linehan. I think that's how you say her last name. And to treat borderline, now it's become something a bit more mainstream because it includes components of like mindfulness and acceptance and distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness skills. So it's not like the most wildest treatment, in that it involves a lot of components that you actually see in other modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, or just sort of like mainstream culture now with like mindfulness and stuff. But I just wanted to float it out there, like if anyone's listening and they have seen themselves in Clementine or someone else in their lives, like reminds them of that, that this is, and you're wanting more specificity in terms of seeing a provider or what a provider is, like what a provider is capable of. Like if they have some experience with DBT, that can be a helpful place to start, if not to go full heartedly into treatment, not full heartedly, to go full speed into treatment, if you will. And you can get a traditional DBT therapist. Traditional DBT therapists will, if they're like traditional with a capital T, they'll do things like be on call 24/7, because they can sometimes be asking clients to really disengage from what we were talking about in the beginning, which is like self-destructive behaviors. But in doing that, that can create even more intense crisis being felt by the client because they don't know what to do or they don't feel practiced enough in the replacement skills they're learning. So the point of that is that they can call this therapist any time of day or night and they can talk them through what's going on and kind of talk them through replacement skills that they can use instead of like drinking or like any sort of like risky or self-harm or something like that. So I just want to throw DBT out there. It's a bigger concept. So if that felt interesting, I would encourage people to investigate it more. But it's becoming pretty standardized in a lot of ways too. Like myself, like a lot of therapists, we will take a lot of skills from DBT. So I use a lot of DBT in the work that I do with clients, similar to like CBT and other pretty common modalities. But yeah, I just wanted to float that out there to people who were curious. So I didn't really have anything else to say treatment because I don't have anything to matches the kind of stupid treatment they are talking about here. Who would like to go next?
Annie, you want to go or you want me to go?
I'll go.
Go for it.
So what I was thinking about is what it would be like to have Joel and Clementine in my office as a couple. Clearly before they got the treatment done, because otherwise I wouldn't remember each other. The more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that I really think this would be another case where they wouldn't be appropriate for couple work because they both need to do their own work before they can work on their relationship. I think when you have two people who are as in distress as Joel and Clementine are, that we can't do the work we need to do on the relationship because they aren't regulated enough to be able to talk about the relationship in a helpful way.
Yeah.
So they would not be appropriate. Like I would probably see this couple, I would probably do their assessment, and during their assessment, really talk to them about how couples work is not while it can always be helpful, is sometimes not always the right first step. And how sometimes we have to go and do work first and then come back to couples therapy because we have to be able to manage our own regulation at the very least in order to do couples work. So this would be a couple that I think I would screen out for couples therapy because they both have too intensive symptoms to be able to work and just focus on their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Because I wouldn't trust, not in like I wouldn't trust them as individuals, but I just wouldn't trust that they would be able to handle the conversations you have to have in couples therapy about each other.
Yeah.
And that I wouldn't trust that they wouldn't pick up fights about it between sessions because of that.
I would have also zero trust in that. And
yeah.
Getting couples to observe that rule is tremendously difficult anyway.
It is.
But getting these two to not pick at each other over not turning towards if it's Gottman therapy or not following the couple's dialogue or whatever, or just going like, no, we're supposed to be doing this. And likely Joel going like, hey, I need some space. This is too much for me right now. And we're going, no, we have to do this to get fixed. Blah, and they launch right back into it. Or, him neglecting her needs and going like, no, I'd really not like to talk about that right now. And she's like, I'm having a need right now and you're supposed to be helping me. And I'm going like, not space. And she's going like, blow up because he's not meeting her needs. 100%
exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
So just be a fucking yelling match back and forth about who hurt whose feelings first, and it would be completely unhelpful and ineffective.
Yeah.
So this would be a couple that I would screen out. That would not be appropriate for couples therapy.
All right. Benjamin?
Yes. With it seems like EMDR would be an obvious choice given the way that this episode has been structured, but at the moment for me it's not, because I don't have any evidence that there's significant trauma to be discussed. I'm sure there is, but none of it was referenced in the movie for me to say, yes, you definitely need that. So with the characters where they are, well, no, I'm going to take that back. We're just going to strike that statement. Is they went through the trauma of a breakup, and then they went through the trauma of being erased from each other's memory and going through this horrible process. So actually taking all of that back, where I would actually find myself most useful would be treating the trauma of having all of this happen to them.
Yeah. It's almost like the trauma of having amnesia.
Yeah. And probably, honestly, working to try to set up a group for as many people as possible that went through this and got those letters, to have a series of group debriefings would probably be a tremendously helpful thing in setting up a way to talk about almost a support group structure of what life has been like, kind of like we saw happen after the snap in Avengers Endgame. This would be a pretty unique event to have been extraordinarily destructive potential to people, because I guarantee this is not the first time something went wrong.
Oh, in the world of this movie, there's going to be a Lacuna support group of people who survive the Lacuna office.
Fun fact, Lacuna in Italian means downward.
Ooh, the sunken place.
Ooh.
So there's a band that I like the earlier stuff before they went more metalcore, but Lacuna Coil in Italian means downward spiral. And when they were more of a hard rock band before they went like super metally and screamy, which I don't enjoy, I learned that, and I think that's not an accident that this is called Lacuna or downward. I'm sure that's not an accident, but I think that would be honestly the most important thing, is that people get an opportunity to realize that what's happening to them and the unique ways in which it's happening, they are not alone in. That there can be a way to create space so that their individual experience is validated, but also their collective one can be explored, because I think that would be a tremendously isolating experience. Kind of like where war vets don't want to talk to people who haven't been to war, and at some point parents don't want to see therapists that don't have kids. It can be a thing. Or like, please tell me again how busy you are. When people have multiple children and they're like, oh, your sleep's important, is it? People have kids, they're like, that's funny. You think sleep registers on my thought process? You see that over and over. People that have isolated populations, people who've been through war, want to be like, tell me again how upsetting it is that your boss yelled at you about a photocopy. My buddy got shot in the face in front of me. Like, tell me again how upsetting this copy machine is. Really. And they want to have the ability to talk to other people who have had that experience of war, and of having somebody try to tell them that a copy machine breaking is the worst part of their day, and that being a crisis, a real crisis. And they're not understanding how this is possibly relevant given the scope and scale of things that they've seen or been through. And I think all of the people who went through this Lacuna procedure are going to be much the same, that they're going to be uniquely going through something that is disrupting their life and sense of self entirely, but no one else is going to understand because they won't have a frame of reference that remotely matches. So they'll only approach the people who've been through this procedure from their own frame of reference, which will not in any way, shape, or form validate the experience or frame of reference that the person who went through the procedure is thinking from. And it will create a chronic invalidation loop. So I think that would be the thing that occurs to me most. Rather than treat the individual characters, I'd want to gather everybody as much as I could. And
for sure.
start that. I think that's far
For
more
that
important.
for that class
Yeah.
action lawsuit that's going to eventually happen against
Mhm.
Lacuna.
Yep.
All right. Well, we will take a final break here and be back with our final thoughts. All right. Who'd like to go first?
I can go. So
All right.
this is my first time seeing this film.
Oh.
I have not seen it before. I generally don't enjoy non-sequential films. They frustrate me sometimes. This one I thought was more on line with Memento, where it was better done and more like understandable what's going on with the non-sequential film. But ultimately, I liked it. I thought it was a good film. I think the acting was exquisite, and that Kate Winslet getting nominated for Best Actress was well deserved. I think Jim Carrey should have been nominated for Best Actor as well. He was phenomenal. And this was such a turn for him. I don't know if this or Number 23 came out first,
Well,
but
Truman Show came out before this too.
yeah, where Jim Carrey was starting to stretch his legs and break out of being zany, ridiculous, manic bananas fest, and instead showing he actually has tremendous understanding of human condition and can portray that through his acting in ways that are really impactful. And I thought he did it well in this film. And Kate Winslet was also just exquisite at encapsulating a completely different type of person than she'd ever played on screen or any of us had seen before. And it was writing is the way they were able to capture kind of this surrealness of watching your memories fade and fighting through it, and do this with practical effects. It's really an amazing film, and it's impressive. I don't know it's one that I will seek out to watch over and over, but I am really glad that I did, and glad that we got asked to do it, and somebody finally made me watch it. So
You can thank Kayla.
I can thank Kayla for that. Thank you, Kayla. I appreciate it, making me watch this. And I really do like it as a way to look at kind of what I do and have an obvious cultural reference point that I missed that people may ask me about. Is like, is it going to be like Eternal Sunshine? And before I'd be like, no. And I might need to know the answer to that question of no, so that I can reassure clients when I ask them to, trust me to do hypnosis or EMDR type of work with them, that I am not, in fact, going to put you through something that's going to make you lose things. You will only gain from it. So with that, I thought it was really great. I don't know that I enjoyed it, but I really appreciate it for being excellent.
Yeah. You want to go, Hannah?
Sure. I don't like this movie.
Hannah, do you like movies?
I didn't like it the first time I saw it, about maybe like 20 years ago. And I don't like it now. And I don't think I'll ever watch it again. I think mostly because I hate Joel. They make him a decidedly unlikable character. I think it was acted fine. Yeah, that's about it. I think it was acted fine. I'm not ever gonna watch it again. And yeah, that's not how shit works.
Well, I will follow that. I think though, similar to what you said, Ben, is I don't know if I'll ever revisit this movie again. It's not a pleasant watch. It's not like a warm, comfy watch either. I watched it when it first came out because I will admit that I was of a certain hipster persuasion when I was younger, and this was definitely like one of the calling cards of being a hipster, was like this movie in like Garden State, and like
This is why I didn't
making
watch
that
it.
your personality. So when I sat down with Hannah to watch it 2 days ago, I was like, how can this only be the second time I ever watched this movie? Like with like 20 years in between, because this was so like my niche at that time, like my aesthetic. And I'll tell you this, about 20 minutes in, I was like, oh, because this movie is fucking miserable. Like, I think it's a well done movie. I think it's interestingly written. I think it's well acted. Like, I think as a movie, yeah, I get why it got all the accolades it got. Like, I totally understand it. And I didn't feel good watching it. I didn't feel good revisiting it. I was like, I didn't particularly like anybody in the movie. I think Mark Ruffalo's like beautiful to look at. Love that for myself. But other than that, I was like, I'm not having fun, y'all. And you know me, I'm just trying to have fun. And I'm not rooting for anybody. Like I want them to not have to deal with this procedure anymore. And obviously I want them to get away from these people, but I'm not rooting for them to be together. I don't really understand the romance of it. I think when I was young and watched it in the very beginning, when they find each other again, even though they don't remember each other, I think in the beginning I thought, oh, that's romantic when I first saw this. It's because they really are supposed to be together. So they're always going to find each other no matter what, even if you scrub their brain to death. But now I watch it and I'm like, oh, it's just because they didn't learn anything. And so they're attracted to each other the same way they were attracted to each other initially before. But that's not necessarily a good thing because they are just going to repeat the same pattern they did before, which made them miserable.
It's Ross and Rachel. Not really, but like they did, no work happened, no change happened. Like the same, no growth has happened. Nobody did any work on either side. We read 18 pages front and back, and we fell asleep, and didn't read and missed the entire point, and then misrepresented ourselves in the entire thing and agreed to something without actually knowing, or like the same kind of energy of like no work has happened now and the same faults that existed before. So
like, where are we going with this? I think that's where. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was just gonna say, like, it seemed like they tried to indicate like a more empathic and mindful version of them existed after this that might be more willing to approach each other's faults. But the idea that like the star-crossed lovers just have to be together, that a lot of people seem to take this for, was not the point.
Yeah, like if that would have worked and this is what I was kind of expecting to happen because I couldn't really remember it very well, is I was like, well, at a certain point, he's going to start running into all the memories with Clementine that were really positive and good. And he's just remembering all these bad things because they just broke up and they currently hate each other, right? And that didn't happen. So I was like, so what are we clinging to here, y'all? The fact that you were together before? And you don't remember now why it didn't work. So yeah. So I also confront the idea or challenge the idea that this is a romance. And that alone is why I'll never watch it.
Yeah.
I'm a romance girly, and this is not a romance. Anyway, so on that note, once again, thank you, Kayla, for sponsoring, I guess, this episode. We really appreciate you. As we've said before, if anyone else has a movie in mind that they really want us to talk about and we haven't gotten to it yet, become a Patreon patron. If you're a patron of $50 or more, you get to pick an episode that we talk about. Even if you don't want to spend $50 or more, if you spend 10 or more, you get early unedited access to our unedited episodes for people who listen before they get edited out for mainstream consumption. If you would like to support us in other ways, obviously leave us reviews on wherever you listen to podcasts. That's the easiest way for new listeners to find us. We really appreciate it. We read reviews and we're all very sensitive. And by we, I mean me. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, like if you want to reach out to us and find us, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter/X at popcorn_psych. If you want to reach out to us, you can email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. If you want to sponsor us via merch, you can find us on TeePublic. We have a lot of different selections you can get, from like mugs, t-shirts, things like that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this special episode of Popcorn Psychology. We will be back from hiatus in the spring. And before that, we will have our Valentine's Day episode as well. So check out for that. So keep holding your memories, y'all. You need them, even the not so fun ones. Goodbye.